And we're live. Welcome to the Muslim Street, our weekly podcast. And I think that we have some great discussion going on tonight. I'm here with my co-host, Hina Lotus, and also a friend of the Muslim Street, Salim Abdul Khalid out of Chicago. Salim, thanks for joining us, man. I tell you, great conversations every time that you plug in with us, uh, especially coming out of Chicago and that particular perspective. Because as you look at the Muslim Street, Chicago is kind of underrepresented, right? And so your perspective and really tell us what's going on in that corridor of this country, particularly in Chicago, amongst the Muslims and the progressive movement is very important to us. So today we're going to talk about a number of things. One of the topics that we're going to move into a little later are conversions. How did we become Muslim? So we got Sister Hina Lotus again, our co-host. That conversation is going to be centered around her. We're going to ask her some great questions, and she's going to tell us about her transition. And I think the audience will get a lot out of that. Before we jump in, I just want to say and encourage you guys to go to themuslimstreet.com. That's themuslimstreet.com, and subscribe to our website. Check out our articles from our thought leaders. And also you can find us on the Muslim Street, on the Muslim Street on YouTube, Twitter, X, of course. And of course, eventually we are going to launch our platform across all platforms, Spotify, Apple, Instagram, TikTok. You'll be able to find us. We're in the soft launch period, and essentially we'll be going hard and fast during the month of January. More to follow there. Some great things are going to be happening with the Muslim Street. We're going to have merch. I never really liked that word. Y'all like that? Merch? I'm more of a we got some gear, we have some Muslim Street gear. I don't like that word. If you guys want to use merch, go ahead, but I don't like it. We're going to have some Muslim Street gear, t-shirts, hats, coffee mugs. We're going to be doing some great giveaways. Some exciting times across the Muslim Street. Not only we're going to be involved in political discussions that we go into 2025, but also some cultural discussions, some warm discussions around family ideas, what's really going on with Islam and really how it looks on a day-to-day basis. There'll be some kind of artsy stories. We want to make sure that we cover all corners of the Muslim Street and the interest. We're going to be having some great guests, as you have already seen, who will come to the platform and discuss some very significant issues. One thing that you won't find on the Muslim Street on this platform is a soft position on hard-hitting issues as it relates to the world, as it relates to domestic and international politics. This page is not for the ones who want to get along with the rest of the world. Nah. This page, you're going to see voices that have been left out, not only of the mainstream Muslim community here in the United States, but obviously the mainstream media, right? So these are going to be cutting edge voices who don't necessarily have a platform. And as you can see, in the era of censorship, not only on Facebook and Instagram and all other types of social media, they, and I'm going to define who they is. How many times I hear that? They. So they, being the white power structure, will only allow voices and messages out that they want the people to consume. And,
right.
and
politically correct.
And there's no political correctness here. That is not going on. So, but we're going to find a way. It's a revolutionary move. I think that now, Salim and Hina, we see at least a first step in an awkward way how it came about. And that's with back in 2015, Donald Trump emerged to his crowd which was the more populist movement, and he started calling the Western media fake news. That was the start of it, right? Now, whether we don't say that's his politics, that's his crowd, but he introduced that lexicon. He exposed Donald Trump, exposed the Western media to the fallacies that they are. Now, what he didn't know what he was doing was eventually exposing himself. And what do I mean? That the Western media, for his terminology, or what he called the lamestream media, or fake news, or MSDNC and stuff like that, we know it as the part of the white power structure, right? So all he really wanted them to be was a little more kind to him, right? So as he enters his second presidency, you'll see a little bit more kinder message. But essentially what has happened with him just throwing off and exposing the fake news, he did not expose what was really fake about them. And what was really fake about them was that he did I get cut off?
No, you're fine.
No, I can still hear you, man.
Yeah. So what was really fake about them is that who owns that media? And who owns that media is the Zionist structure. They own NBC. They own CNN. They own NBC, ABC, Fox, all of them. The same people who own Fox own CNN. Not the same person, but the same people, right? And they have the same thing. That's the Zionist control interest of white power and its relationship to that. So he didn't get to that part, right? But we he did start the conversation. Now what has happened is that it's been so discredited, the mainstream media, by Donald Trump and his movement. What has happened, Salim and Hina, is that people are now shifting toward other media sources. They're going to YouTube. They're going to TikTok. They're going to Instagram for the actual news. So that helps us because we couldn't afford to buy one of those stations anyway, right? But we will have a presence, and other revolutionary voices will have a presence in the social media space, and they cannot stop that. So what do you guys think about that as a fire starter?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a huge rise of independent journalism. I think especially after October 7th, I think that was kind of like the pinnacle of when you started seeing people understanding and realizing, wait, what we're seeing from the media, what we're gathering from the news sources doesn't coincide with what we're learning from coming directly from Gaza. Right. So I think that's when people on, Twitter, now known as X, we had people on YouTube, we had people start websites. I mean, I think we're very fortunate because even the Muslim street itself is independent journalism. So, even though we're covering various different topics every week, we even have our periodical, Malik has written in it, I've written for it. There's all these articles that we ourselves are writing in the midst of this rise of independent journalism that's bringing about messages that are not state sponsored. There's no lobbying behind it. There's no underlying Zionism behind it or anything of that nature. This is just hard hitting facts and the truth, and something I think the public needs. They need to be educated on what is directly impacting them, as opposed to whatever the media is trying to indoctrinate them with.
Yeah. Good point. A couple of months ago, one of the contributors to the Muslim Street wrote an article on an issue in the Muslim world. And when I posted that article, a well-written article from themuslimstreet.com, and you can find us at www.themuslimstreet.com, I posted it on Facebook, and they literally banned it off Facebook. This was just a general article, So this whole shadow banning, Salim, who I think is one of the preeminent Black Muslim thinkers in the United States. There's others, Darul bin Wahad. There's other political thought leaders, not only including myself, but Art Mobley of the Darfur 23, and people like Jared Ball, whom are some of the most profound thinkers that we have among us. They'll post on Facebook or on Instagram and get 2 or 3 likes. right? I have 5,000 followers on Facebook. I'll post something and 2 or 3 people will see it. That's it, right? So we have to beat them at their game. They want to play that game, then we have to find another game to play. It's just the way it is. And we have to find a way to beat that. We have to find a way to penetrate that. And we will. We'll figure it out. And we already talked about earlier before we went live is how these social media platforms reward the non-thinkers. They allow what they want to scale, and we've seen some real stupid stuff. And you've seen it on a daily basis. They do it all on YouTube. Somebody's acting stupid or they say something that's totally unfounded. And next thing you know, they have 500,000 views.
It goes viral.
Yeah. So, this is a problem because going back to what Donald Trump's talking about, this is fake news and all this stuff. Well, we say in the revolutionary movement, we said this for years and years and decades, that the press in America is free for only those who own it, right? So again, he falls short of that. Now, trying to lead to a conversation, Salim, that you mentioned prior to us launching tonight, and that was, and Hina did too. Kind of what we're talking about the various Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia, the Levant, whom have very great relationships with the West. I mean, and I chimed in and said, that'd be a great conversation starter because it's a reason for that. And the reason lies in the history of Islam. And I want you guys to jump in as I talk about this, and feel free to interrupt me. Upon the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we had the next 4 rulers known as the Khalifa Rashidin, the 4 rightly guided ones. Immediately after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the question arose that had never been entertained before in his 23 years of his prophethood, and that was, who should rule? Who should be the leader? Right. So the Muslims began to fight over this, and this became the first issue, or what was called, the big fitna, right, where the Muslims warred against each other over this one question. And there were 3 fundamental groups that participated in this. One was Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at, Sunnis. The other, Shia, and the other were the Khawarij. The Sunnis won out. In their winning out, what were they interested in? Or I should say, and I want you guys to jump in, how did they self-define themselves? They self-define themselves vis-a-vis the non-Muslims. The Sunni and the Shia, the Shia and the Khawarij define themselves vis-a-vis the Sunnis because the Sunnis won out. Now, the Sunnis, right to this day, even though there were some periods of interruption of their rule over the Muslim world during the 3rd and 4th century Hijri, on the Hijri calendar, where the Shia, known as the century of the Shi, besides that, it's been kind of like a Sunni thing. Points of when the Shias ruled during the 3rd and 4th century, we see the University of Al-Azhar in Egypt. That was under the Fatima rule. The Fatima was Shia, right? They built that university. So I think going back to the Sunnis and what their interest for the general part has been them defining themselves vis-a-vis non-Muslims, and what they're interested in politically is stability. The Shia and the Khawarij, we can only find them in some parts now, small pockets. They were interested in revolution. They are not happy, with this order. You can go fast forward to the late 19th century, and I'll end here and then kind of open this discussion up. Is what happened during the latter part of the 19th century that not only affected Africa and Asia, but the entire Muslim world. And that was European colonialism, European imperialism, European domination of the entire Muslim world, right? And it was at that time that this colonialism moves into the Muslim world with Sunni leadership and control, relatively easy. But it's unsettling for the Shia, right? And I'll bring this last point, and I'll give you guys the floor. It's not an accident that in the current day Middle East, as we see with the genocide in Palestine, who came to their aid? It was not the Sunnis, right? It was the Shias. Hezbollah is Shia, right?
Iran is Shia.
The Houthis are Shia.
Yeah.
So the Iranians are Shia. So why? Because they're interested in revolution. The Sunnis are only interested in stability, right? So this is where that comes about. Salim, what are your thoughts on that?
Very interesting topic, because when you study the history of Islam, particularly after the passing of the Prophet, peace be upon him, you come to the understanding of how much turmoil took place in the Muslim community, with the ascension of the caliphs or the caliphs, with the assassinations that took place of Umar. Then let me see, Uthman was the second one. Is that not right? The second Khalifa.
So Uthman
then Ali was unfortunately murdered. Very, very, very sad history. I'm reminded of a book that I read entitled Secret Societies and Subversive Movements by, I think the author's name was Nesta Webster, and she was pointing out how the Muslim movement back then had been infiltrated by certain Jews that wanted to see turmoil and confusion and plant the seed of chaos amongst the Muslims. So I think that had something to do with it prior to the invasion and the infiltration of the imperialists and the colonizers, which took place during the period that you mentioned as taking place in, what was the 19th century? You mentioned that in the 1800s, I believe it was.
Yeah. So so Berlin Conference, 1884, 1885, where the Europeans sat down and they took a map of the world and they carved it up for themselves. This is during the British Empire.
Particularly Africa. Yeah.
Africa, and later they had just created 20 years or so prior in the 1860s, toward the end of 1860s, what we now know as the Middle East. Prior to that, there was no terminology of the Middle East. We asked the question, if it was the Middle East, where's the middle? Where's the middle? Where's the Middle West? Right. So this is this part of our revolutionary act that we have to redefine the map, and how those terms are used, because those are the terms of the oppression. So the Khalifa Rashidin, and for the audience, the first four rulers after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, known as the Khalifa Rashidin in Arabic, the four rightly guided ones. His best friend Abu Bakr Sadiq is number one. Number two, Umar ibn al-Khattab. Number three, Uthman al-Affan. And then number four was Ali. All assassinated during this whole big fitna by other Muslims over this.
No, it was, Malik, let me correct you. It was the last three caliphs. Abu Bakr was not murdered.
Okay.
It was the last three that were assassinated.
That correction.
Yeah.
So essentially the struggle for who should rule still plays in today, right? The Sunnis won out. The Shia have been, besides some pockets history of a brief rule over nearly a century. It's all been about the Sunnis, and this is played into the hands politically how Muslims are in the world, right? So with that as an understanding, let me ask you: there's been talk and organization at least since the end of colonialism about a Pan-African, Pan-Arab vanguard. Malcolm talked into this with Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. We also saw Mohammed V organize the Casablanca Conference with Senegal and Sekou and others and in 1961. And then, as of late, in the 2000s, it was Muammar Gaddafi who attempted to organize the United States of Africa right up until the time that he was assassinated by the Barack Obama administration.
And Malik, don't forget also that Frantz Fanon, in his book "Wretched of the Earth," talked about the
amazing
importance
book.
of. Yeah, he mentioned the importance of the Arab-African alliance in his book "Wretched of the Earth."
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So again, this it's one thing for us to kind of discuss the effects of this political struggle of who should rule the Muslims, and now we don't have a Khalifa at all. The last Khalifa that we had came out of Turkey, and the whole thing with the out of Turk thing, we need to do a whole show on that. But essentially, at the beginning of the last century, is the stripping away of the Khalifa as a construct in the whole Muslim nation, the Muslims as a whole, and how this has affected us. But it's going to take these new thinkers like ourselves in order to usher in and take the baton from Muammar Gaddafi, the baton from Malcolm and Gamal Abdel Nasser, and move that forward. What are your thoughts on that?
No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
No, I definitely agree, because I think the problem with a lot of the Muslim world, especially when you look in the Swana region, the Middle East, after the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, which was after World War I, you basically had the British go into, that entire region. And again, like you said, carve out various different countries and then pit them against each other, right? So I think what we're running into is these governments that are essentially proxy governments from, the Western colonial powers, or these are governments that essentially have aligned themselves with capitalism, with, globalism and imperialism, because to them, they think, okay, if we align ourselves with imperialism, we won't be subjugated by it, which we've seen again and again, they actually are. So I think it's in the best interests of the African region, as well as the Middle Eastern region, and even, South Asia. And, we have a ton of Muslims in China, and it's global, right? We have Muslims all over the world to unite as an ummah and to kind of have that unification that I think supersedes any allegiance that we have to nationalism, patriotism, economic, systems like capitalism. I think that is in our best interest, because a lot of the rise that we see of these governments that are coming about, they're not benefiting Muslims. They're not benefiting the populations. They're actually furthering the agenda of Zionism. They're furthering the agenda of capitalism.
Yeah. Very good point. Very cool. You're listening to The Muslim Street. You can find us on themuslimstreet.com, also on Facebook, YouTube. Please like and share. Please subscribe. We want to get those numbers up. Get them up. And Salim, as we talk about Islam, I heard the great minister Louis Farrakhan one time say that if we just want a religion, we might as well have just stay Christian. Right, but Islam militates for justice.
Absolutely,
you can't be no Muslim and accept this white supremacist framework and order of things, and say, oh, that's okay. Let them rule over us. Let them go over to Palestine and bury 250,000 people in a year. No. Islam says, no. No, you
Well,
have
let me say this, Brother Malik. But when we study the history of Prophet Muhammad, we are looking at a man that was an activist from the beginning. When he received the revelation from Allah, you know, he got out on the streets of Mecca, exhibiting nothing but pure courage and fearlessness against the exploiters, the manipulators, the controllers of the economic controllers of the Arabian society, you know. And so in order for us to, you know, truly exhibit and implement and imitate what a true Muslim is, you know, then we must go back, you know, to trying to be like Prophet Muhammad was. You see, you know, you can't be a Muslim, as you were saying. You can't be a Muslim and not have a heart against injustice, against tyranny. The Prophet himself said that a Muslim is one that speaks out against tyranny. He said in the Hadith to this effect that you can't if you can't change it with your hands. You know, this is just coming to my mind exactly how that Hadith goes. Some to the effect of, if you see a wrong, you should change it with your hand. If you can't do that, at least speak out against it. And if you're too weak to do that, at least feel against it in your heart. You see, but what we're seeing today in the Muslim community, in the Muslim so-called Ummah, is we're seeing a lot of injustice, you know, not just happening against Muslims, but we see injustice happening in the world where Muslims are obligated to speak out and they say nothing because of the cowardice that they have in their hearts.
To this point, Hina, I argued, and listen, hear me out on this one. We can argue that Donald Trump coming to office says, and he says, whether this happens or not, he ran on it at least, that while he was president for 4 years, there were no new wars, right? From 1990 to 2016, the United States government warred against the Muslims. Millions upon millions and millions of bodies from across administrations, from the Bush administration, Daddy Bush, to the Clintons.
Clinton. Yeah, that was the Gulf War, yeah.
Listen, Bill Clinton, with his no good self, after he got impeached on that Monica Lewinsky blue dress thing, the very next day, to keep it off the front page, he bombed the schoolhouse in Khartoum in Sudan, killed Muslim babies, just to keep it up, right? So for them, Muslims' lives, I mean, it's worth pennies. And then post 9/11, George Bush went out after every Muslim he could find, and then when he couldn't find anymore, he handed off the baton to Barack Obama, and he continued to kill us, right?
Obama drone bombed more Muslims than Bush did.
So, I was in the Maghreb in 2011 in February, March, the spring, when in the African Maghreb, I was literally there when they started going after Gaddafi. Bombs, drones, the whole thing. And eventually I was on some radio show, was interviewing me, and they asked me a question. Could Muammar Gaddafi survive this? And I said, I don't see any way he could. And by the fall, they had already assassinated him and overthrew his government. So I say that to say,
you know what, Malik? Gaddafi's biggest mistake was when he gave up his nuclear arsenal, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get back to the point of if this Donald Trump stops the warring against the Muslims for another 4 years, I likened it to a point in history that Muslims should take advantage of. That if this happens over the next 4 years, we just spent the last year of watching the United States government finance a genocide live on social media, okay? And literally finance the genocide. Over 250,000 Muslims dead, ethnic
And
cleansing.
they don't even call it a genocide. Till this day, they're like, it is not defined as a genocide, which
So,
is the craziest thing.
The only legitimate genocide in history is that which happened to Jews in Nazi Germany. Let them tell.
So the point I'm making here is during the time of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there was a point where the Muslims had taken heavy losses from the Meccans. Who were they? Open enemies, the enemies of Islam. He called a meeting with them in a place called Hudaybiyah, and he negotiated a peace treaty. And the peace treaty is famously known in Muslim law as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And in that treaty, the Prophet ﷺ signed a treaty that was slanted toward his enemies, in favor of his enemies. But there was one thing in that treaty, amongst the concessions, that he took advantage of, and he saw the vision, he saw the long game, and that was a 10-year period of no wars.
Right.
What happened in that 10-year period when they were not allowed to war against the Muslims? And I'm putting this in the context of what just happened in Gaza. And if Trump stays to what he did in 2016 and says, oh, no, I'm a businessman, war is too expensive, and he doesn't kill the Muslims. Now, what happened in that period with the Prophet ﷺ is that the Muslims were able to go back to Medina, gather their strength, grow their resources, grow their ranks. And at the end of that period, guess what happened? They went back to Mecca. They took Mecca. They said that the Muslims left, with the Prophet ﷺ left Medina with 10,000 men. By the time they hit Mecca, some say that 100,000 had joined on the way, right? And when he got to Mecca, he sent Bilal, who he used to call the faithful to prayer, into the Kaaba, and he said these words: all who don't want to die, go to the Kaaba. All who don't want to die, go to the house of Abu Sufyan, right? And the Prophet ﷺ put his chin to his chest, his forehead to his animal, and everybody submitted. And that is the takeover of the Muslims. Why? Because we had a period of peace where we can gather our strength. But if we continue to be, go through years and years and years of just what happened in Gaza, we're going to always be trying to defend that. But in this period, and let's say that over the next 4 years, that Trump and the white supremacist movement says, let's leave these Muslims alone. Let's just say that happens, right? In that 4-year period, we have to do what we have to do. Pan-African, Pan-Arab unity toward a whole revolutionary world. We have to make the move. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think what you're saying is absolutely true, because I think I would say before the Ottoman Empire, we had, how would I explain it? I think we just had a lot more unity, at least within the Middle East. And then I think after the Ottoman Empire, when everything started to destruct, you saw all these countries that basically started aligning themselves with the opposition and then opposing each other. And I think that was to the advantage of, the British and America, because essentially the divide and conquer is already being done internally, right? Like all these countries are fighting amongst themselves, right? And so I feel like it's kind of doing the dirty work on behalf of like the colonial world. So I think it's an internal solution, right? I think a lot of people are like, well, if America stops doing X, Y, and Z, if the West stops doing X, Y, and Z, we have to dismantle this system, that system. But it has to come internally. The solution comes from us. It's not going to be something, no one that is, I guess, like in opposition to Islam and in opposition to economic equity, right, or economic democracy is going to give us the tools to liberate ourselves. So it's going to have to be an internal solution coming from people, honestly, no different than you and I. And I think a lot of Muslims don't understand the amount of power they have. I think the second thing you have to understand is when it comes to, being Muslim, and we've addressed this before, but part of, being a Muslim is to, stand up for social justice, to stand up for those who are oppressed, to stand up for those who are going through poverty, right? It's much deeper than the pillars. So we have to understand that Islam is an ideology, the way that we need to go about women's rights, the way that we need to go about economics, the way that we need to go about like legal discourse. It's written in the Sharia. The way that we need to live our life, that's Sunnah, the way of the Prophet. So everything has already been written out. To study Islam, to embrace it, and to live it on an ideological level is the only thing that I personally think will liberate us.
Yeah. So Salim, in 1961, um, uh, 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 the Casablanca bloc, or the Casablanca group, was formulated that included Algeria, Egypt, Ghana, Libya, Mali, and Morocco, led by on the turf of Mohammed V and others, right? Sekou Touré of Guinea, who Kwame Touré took reverence with and lived there. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana was part of that. Gamal Abdel Nasser, the revolutionary bloc of these now newly freed African countries from colonialism. There's a group calling itself the Darfur 23 that was formed in 2007 in Khartoum, is working feverishly to revive a repeat of the Casablanca bloc. This was the basis to the African Union. There was a dissent on what was called the Monrovia bloc. These groups, these countries had a different perspective on how Africa should go forward, where the Casablanca bloc obviously wanted a Pan-African, Pan-Arab unity movement, as well as a independent Africa away from its colonial powers. So there's activity going on, and I would tell you, if we look at a framework, Malcolm talked about this. He talked about the Bandung Conference.
I was just about to mention that.
And the non-aligned movement. This falls right into place as we branch out for a true worldwide leftist movement. This plays right into that, as we expand to the other darker parts of the world. So what are your thoughts on that as a basis? Because we need a basis and a call to action.
Well, absolutely. I remember reading Malcolm's autobiography and him mentioning that history of the Bandung Conference, where these groups of people, that had been colonized, from around the world by the imperialists, from the Africans and the Asian bloc, all came together, and they pinpointed, who the major enemy was. We need a new Bandung conference, and when I think about things like this, I think about statements that I've heard, coming from some of the Afrocentrics like Umar Johnson, in relation to what's going on over there in Gaza or Palestine right now. When it first jumped off in October, I think October the 17th, Umar Johnson was asked on a radio podcast what was his opinion about that, and he stated that it wasn't any concern of his, and as far as he was concerned, Black people didn't have a dog in that fight. And I mention that because this is indicative of the need for or call for people that had the worldwide international consciousness of people like Malcolm X, who identified the need for people, all oppressed people all around the globe, to come together, to fight the imperialist, colonialist beasts that's been stepping on people's necks for hundreds of years.
Yeah, so I think the big difference, and thanks for bringing that up. I think it's a very important point as we talk about the, as you mentioned, the Pan-Africanist voices that are out there, and you mentioned Dr. Umar Johnson. Dr. Umar Johnson doesn't have a movement. He has no cadre. He has no men. He has nothing. Right. He has no organization. But what he does have is the white man's YouTube, okay, who scales his voice all over the place for a reason. They know he don't have a movement. The Darfur 23 has a movement, right? Sure. These are people whom organizing on the ground all over the world, forced underground. the United States government hasn't put him on any kind of soft trail. He can hop on any plane he wants and get anywhere he wants, and they're not going to even talk to him, right? So, so these, and I think, it's just like when Marcus Garvey, and we kind of like in that period right now, where we're lulled to sleep, right? There's no defined leadership, all right, for probably the first time in 100 years. Have you noticed that? Now, Marcus Garvey left Jamaica in the West Indies, fleeing apathy from the Jamaicans. They were lazy, bro. They didn't want to do nothing. I don't know what they're doing now, but they didn't want to do nothing then. So he came here looking for Booker T. Washington, but he had missed him by a year. And when he kept in New York, Garvey, and I say this in respect to organizing and the difference between a true Pan-African movement and these YouTube voices who don't mean nothing. They will go away as soon as a white man pull the plug. All right. Right. Marcus Garvey stood and landed on the Hudson River, and he asked the question of the Black people. He said, where are your kings and queens? Where's your army, your navy, and your Marines, right? He said, where are your ships with commerce? He looked to his left, he looked to his right, he saw none, and he said, I will help to make them. And then he built the largest movement amongst Black people in the United States to this day. Yes. There were 14 million Black people in the United States at the time. Garvey had 8 million on his rolls. Incredible. 60% of all Black people in the United States belong to the Garvey movement.
That's amazing.
That's organizing. Now, Umar Johnson may have 60,000 followers on YouTube, bro, but it's not the same, and eventually those people like that, they will be reacting to revolutionary activity taking place if we get this period of peace, this period of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. We literally need to resurrect a Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Part 2, and take it to the United States government and tell Trump, as an action item, sign this. We want you to sign that you want war with the Muslims for the next 4 years. We have work to do, even though our work is to, bring your demise. We have work to do. We have work to do, and we cannot do that work if we dodge in bombs from the largest military in the history of the world. Yes, the United States government. Right. Yeah. So I want to pivot here as we wind down the last 15 minutes of the show. You're listening to the Muslim Street podcast. You can find us also on YouTube at the Muslim Street. Hit like and share and subscribe. Also, you can find us at themuslimstreet.com, and you'll find some great articles and the Muslim thought leaders. If you would like to submit an article for publication on themuslimstreet.com, please go to the site and click on that and email us there, and we will take a look at that and see if your article is militant enough to print. If it's not, you can go to some other newspaper and have them do that. But we're not going to print any of that stuff. Okay. Now, Hina, we want to talk a little bit about, as we wind the show down, on how did people, kind of convert to Islam into this fabulous religion of ours. And we want to kind of hear your story. Tell us what has been your life like in Islam, your transition, your beginning. How did you become a Muslim? What kind of Muslim are you? And oh, by the way, the audience, there's a whole different kind. There's a lot of different types of Muslims, right? But we all, anyway.
Of course. Well, I did want to preface this by saying, just as you were saying, the Ummah is really diverse, right? I think a lot of news sources or ideologies or movements that you study, you'll have people say, well, this sect of Islam is incorrect. They're not true Muslims. And we have to first and foremost understand and realize that as long as a human being says the Shahada, they're a Muslim. And anything beyond that when it comes to judgment is between them and Allah. So I think I wanted to start with that. But that being said, I was born Muslim, alhamdulillah. I was raised actually as an Ismaili Muslim, which is a Shia branch. It's the second biggest Shia branch all over the world. and they follow an individual named Aga Khan. The interesting thing about this is I was a very big fan of Islamic teachings. And I honestly, I did enjoy Ismailism for what it was. I think it's it's not an orthodox branch of Islam. It's very reformed, if you will. And so the pillars are different. The layout of the masjid is different. Ismaili Muslims also attend something called a Jamaat Khana, which is its own kind of masjid, and only Ismailis are allowed. If we ever want to go into the history of it, that started from the Dorul Sattar period where Ismailis were being killed. That's where you saw the rise of like the assassins. Those were actually Ismailis. And then Ismailis started worshiping in their own masjid, and only Ismailis are allowed in. Now, that was something.
On this point, you mentioned the assassins. It was the assassins who killed Imam Ali. But go ahead.
Yeah.
So this was later on. This was, I think, around the 12th or 13th Imam. So let me actually back up because I was raised Shia, so I know a little bit more on that side. With Prophet Muhammad, there was two ideologies that came about. Sunniism, which is people of the Sunnah, people who are orthodox and follow the way of the Prophet. And Sunnis essentially believe that the Prophet declared his own cousin, if I'm not mistaken, Abu Bakr, as the first Khalifa, which we were discussing earlier. And Khalifas were only allowed to have political power, but not like religious, I guess, oversight. Because the only, religious knowledge that we need comes from the Quran. That's the best way to put it. Shias, on the other hand, believe that the Prophet went to an area called Gadirikum, and he said to a bunch of followers that, if I am the city of knowledge and Hazrat Ali is my gate, which was, his nephew. And so they said that, like Prophet Muhammad left behind two things, which was the rope of imamat. And imams, basically, this is different than Sunni imams. These imams would have religious jurisdiction as well as political. That's one of the biggest differences between, Shias and Sunnis. I'm not saying one is more Muslim than the other. That's just historically speaking. And so when Hazrat Ali became, the first imam, I guess after 6 imams, right? And there's just one, there's not multiple. After 6 imams, basically you had, again, like another separation. And so you had the Shnashris, which are known as the Twelvers. Those are the majority of the Shias. That's the majority of Iran. And then the second branch was Ismailism. So they picked the other brother, per se, as their leader. And Ismailis till this day have a living imam. I guess the biggest comparison I would make it to is maybe like the Pope. So it's like a Pope for Ismailis, per se, right? And it's just one distinctive branch of Shiism. But, all history aside, I was raised as an Ismaili, and Ismailism, again, is not orthodox. It's very reformed. The pillars are different. The masjid is different. The layout is different. And so being raised in it, I like that we learned a lot of Shia concepts. We learned a lot of Sufi concepts. It was very progressive in a lot of ways, but there was just something lacking. Like I personally felt, not to say they're not Muslims by any means, I think it's a beautiful religion, but that sect just didn't fulfill me. So I would just, say I'm a Muslim by label, but I wasn't really practicing it. I believed it in a very like shallow kind of way. And then, my father had passed away when I was 12 in 1999. My mother passed away in, 2021. Around that time, majority of my friends were Sunnis. And the reason this is important is I felt like the Somali community, especially when you have orphans or widows, we're taught in our religion to, give them family, to give them peace, to come around them as an ummah. I didn't get that so much from the Somali community, not to say there's not amazing individuals, but that facet of the faith was not so practiced in the community that I was in. And all the Sunni friends that I had, they recognized that, hey, my sister and I were 2 unmarried girls. We don't have any family. We don't have any parents. And they didn't treat us like outsiders, like, oh, well, they're Shia, they're Ismaili, we're Sunni. They embraced us, right? They weren't looking at the differences. They viewed it as an ummah.
Who is this that embraced you?
The Sunni community.
Oh, okay.
Because majority of my friends were Sunni at the time. And so I started going to a Sunni masjid. I was very aware of the history and the ideologies, but I kind of took it as, how they say you have to be an ambassador of your faith. So these individuals are ambassadors of their faith. I went inside a Sunni masjid, and I learned the differences. I learned about Sunnah, I learned about Sharia, I learned about all these concepts that weren't so much taught in Ismailism. And I think I finally found a home, because even though my sister and I are orphans and we don't have family, it doesn't feel like that. I don't even like saying, oh, I don't have family. My family is like the Sunni community. And so learning about it, being embraced by the aunties, the uncles, like I view them as like my mothers, my fathers, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. And it's not just the social or like community aspect. I think even ideologically, like the way, the 5 pillars, you have Sunnah, you have the Hadiths, you don't have someone that has like a religious jurisdiction. I embraced it, and I think it really fulfilled me in a lot of ways. And I think the more I study Islam, the more I understand like the different ideologies and the schools of thought, the more I study Islamic finance and the legalities and even women's rights, the more I realize Islam at the time of its inception, I think it how would I put it? I think it like had all these systems that were created that were to benefit humanity. And so now the Western world is waking up and they're talking about women's rights. They're talking about, socialism. They're talking about universal health care. They're talking about how, certain legal practices need to be abolished, X, Y, and Z. That was already established with Islam. And if anything, a lot of people say, oh, well, women's rights in Islam are now being brought to the West. That's not true, because I think feminism, Western feminism, is an agent of the patriarchy, and it's very like, it's an extension of capitalism, right? It's not true liberation. I think one thing that I really enjoy about Islam, like learning about it, is women's rights in the context of how, the Prophet taught it. Women are put on a pedestal, right? Women are not like, oh, men and women are equal 50-50, X, Y, and Z, what men can do, women can do. There's very distinctive gender roles, but it's to complement each other, right? Like we were made in pairs. And so women are just as necessary as men, even though there's very different roles and functions. But the way that I think Islam taught it was that women are put on a pedestal. So, even the Prophet said, the best among you are those who are best to your wives. And, heaven lies at the feet of mother. So I think there's a lot of Western misconceptions, and someone who's very passionate about women's rights and advocacy and education, I think those are the things that I myself didn't learn when I was, attending a Jamaat Khana and I was an Ismaili. I have a lot of respect for Ismailis. That's where I kind of started my religious journey. They're very much part of the Ummah. But for me personally, Sunniism is something that is very intellectual. It's very encompassing. And to live in the way of the Prophet is something I think I identify with more. I personally identify more with the Orthodox aspect than I do the reformed aspect, right? To me, Islam doesn't need any reforming. It's perfect as it was created. And it doesn't have like, you don't have to adapt it to every time period. It was created to be, universal and timeless. So that was my journey.
Yeah, let's step back to something you said in this transition of your mother and your father passing away, and you talked about the Sunni community. That was support mechanism. When you transitioned to Sunni Islam, were you the last of your family, or you didn't have cousins or extended family who were still Ismailis?
So I have family in Pakistan. I've never met them, right? Because my father passed away when I was very young, and my mother was Indian. So when you are Indian or born in India, you're not allowed to go to Pakistan. And if you're born in Pakistan, you're not allowed to go to India. So after my father passed, I just lost that connection with my Pakistani side. And then with my mother's side, we do have family. They're just not really in touch, nothing good or bad. It's just the way life turned out. So it's literally just my sister and I. And from my understanding, most of that family still does practice Ismailism. We're not in touch or anything. But that is something that meant a lot to me. The community I grew up in and the relatives I grew up with that, were predominantly Ismaili, they didn't feel like they had any sort of obligation or responsibility to treat us like family. And, I walked into Sunni Masjid right away. They're like, where are your parents? Are you married? Where are you from? And it wasn't in a gossipy way. It was like, how can I help you? How can we be like an extension of helping you, being there for you, supporting you? And it was very non-judgmental. It's always been very warm. And anytime I go to the Sunni Masjid that, I attend, they always say, Hina, we respect you so much because despite everything you've gone through, you're such a positive individual. You have so much faith. You're, so religious. You're willing to learn, even though you didn't grow up in this community. So they view me and my sister as like an example of faith. And that is something that's just very humbling. They always said that orphans have like an elevated status within the concept of, Islam. And I didn't really feel that until I went inside of Sunni Masjid. So, alhamdulillah, I think everything happens for a reason. I'm so thankful for everything I've been through because it led me to Sirat al-Mustaqim. It led me to where I'm supposed to be. And honestly, despite everything, I'm the happiest I've ever been, alhamdulillah. Really,
Yeah.
I think it's given me the strength through deen, which I don't think anything from dunya can ever give an individual.
Yeah, you mentioned.
I had a question for you, if I might jump in. You very well articulated what I believe to be the true and proper role of women in Islam. Are you familiar with the Somalian lady that grew up as a Muslim and is now writing anti-Islamic books? I think her name is what is it? Hersey is her last name.
Hershey Ali.
Yeah. Are you familiar with her? And what is your interpretation of what she's been saying against Islam?
So I don't know about her, to be candid. I'm going to have to look her up. And there is actually another lady from Bangladesh. I don't know her name. I'm going to have to Google it. But she herself, I think, had written something similar where she said she basically took the Quran, broke it into pieces and was like, this is anti-women, this is anti-women, this is anti-women. Okay. My interpretation of that is, I think what happens is we are indoctrinated, right? We don't live, even if we live in Muslim countries, we've been indoctrinated through globalization, capitalism, imperialism. So when you learn about the context of women and men and economics and politics through that lens, and then you're looking at Islam, you're going to pick it apart because it doesn't align with that indoctrination. I think you have to kind of reverse that. I think when you're reading the Quran, when you're, practicing the faith, you have to be Muslim first. This comes before, the country of origin, your ethnicity, your gender, your political beliefs, your economic beliefs, anything that you've learned in like the educational system. Islam is perfect, it's pure. And then when you study that and use that Islamic lens to look at all the other ideologies, which are man-made, right? Whether you're talking about socialism or capitalism, these are man-made concepts. Whether you're talking about, women's rights or the patriarchy, these are man-made systems, So all these man-made systems, you can't take a man-made system and take that as the lens of how to interpret the Quran.
Yeah, and to Salim's point about Hershey Ali, she leaves Somali. She only grew up a Muslim, just like anybody else. It's like who was born in a Muslim country. She ends up in with the Dutch, and white supremacy got her, bro. The white boys got her. All right,
yeah, no doubt.
And then she comes at a time.
As well, that author, he's similar to that.
He comes at a time. Hershey Ali comes at a time when there's an onslaught against Islam heavy during the second Bush administration after 9/11. The white,
and also during that period where Charlie Hebdo was making these political cartoons to attack Prophet Muhammad.
Point about her, she along with others are raised up to attack Islam for the Western media. And she ends up, denouncing Islam. She's not even a Muslim. She's a kafir, and we can move on from that conversation.
Yeah. Well, something to say about women's rights. I did want to get into this, especially for my Muslimah sisters. A lot of people, especially in this day and age with all the propaganda against Islam, they're like, oh, well, look at Afghanistan. Look at all these countries. They're doing X, Y, and Z. And look at, America. Look at the West. Women can vote. We can, wear whatever we want. We can have a job. Let's back up for a second. Look at when Islam started. That religion at that time, right? Several centuries ago, the Prophet encouraged women to have a political voice, to be educated. They could own property. They could divorce for any reason. Women could not be forced into marriage, right? And so what we're seeing right now is while we're going through the history of the Islamic world, we have to realize that while all these countries have been colonized and have proxy governments, they're basically taking cultural practices, right, which encompass misogyny and encompassing that into their laws and saying, well, this is Islam. If you study Islam for yourself as an individual, you'll realize that all these rights that women were given at that time several centuries ago are still not even in the Western world, right? Like there's so many different like concepts that the West is now catching up with. I think back even like today when it comes to like marriage and pink pill advice that we see in the West, where they're like, oh, men should be providers and X, Y, and Z. That was in Islam. In Islam, when it came to a marriage, a man was supposed to be a provider and, financially take care of a woman, give her like provision, to, take her opinion into account, to make sure she can be educated, that she could have like, a voice. And even when it comes to the hijab, a lot of people say, well, oh, that's like so, that's so oppressive. I don't agree with that at all. I think Islam encourages modesty. And I think at the time of the Prophet, women were being covered up because during that time, women were very heavily like sexualized, if you want to call it that in a very politically correct way.
Like they are today.
So, yeah, the Muslim women were covered, and it was like a symbol of nobility. Right. And so people would look at these women that were well dressed, that were covered up, that were not being sexualized. It was a status thing. It actually encouraged a lot of people to convert to Islam because they wanted to be part of this movement. And I think that is also encompassed with, the Muslim world today. As a Muslim woman, I feel liberated because, if a man is to say, oh, she's beautiful, X, Y, and Z, that's one thing. But I'm given a voice. I'm able to have these conversations. I'm looked at much more than an object. And Muslim women have had these rights for several centuries. If you're looking at governments that are putting in Islamic law, they're not really Islamic. These are political in nature and being called Islamic, to go, with the imperialist agenda. So history is important. Studying your religion is very important. And as women, we have to understand Islam has given us way more rights than the West could ever even conceptualize. Even women's voting, women's suffrage came about in the last 100 years in the Western world. Women in Islam have been able to vote for several centuries now. This is old news to us.
The Prophet was the first to start allow alimony for women.
Yeah. So that was a great story. Thanks for informing us, Hina, on that transition of yours. These personal stories mean a lot. They mean a lot to people whom are grasping toward their own path. I want to close out. I want to thank everybody for joining us on the Muslim Street podcast this week. Stay tuned next week, same time, same station. You can find us on themuslimstreet.com, on YouTube. Please like and share. You can find us on X, formerly known as Twitter. And again, I want to thank Salim, friend of the Muslim Street, for joining us. Salim,
thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah, please tell the audience where they can find you before we close out.
Well, I'm on Facebook, and also we have a new location here in Chicago, 10846 South Halsted here in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago. We'll be doing dawah from there, and also putting on community events to enlighten the people about Islam, and also make a contribution toward the upliftment of the community. Okay.
And what is the name of your center?
Well, we call it the Malcolm X Library. Once again, 10846 South Halsted, and we have a vast collection of books on Islam, and Black history, where the public can come in off the street, and study and learn about Islam and other aspects of our history.
I got one tough question for you, Salim, at that location before we close out. This will be the last question of the night. Do you sell bean pies there?
We currently don't sell bean pies, but what we do, we buy them, and we invite people to come on out and partake of a delicious piece of it.
All right. As long as you get that bean pie there, and when I'm in Chicago, I'm coming by. Again, we want to thank the audience for joining us here on the Muslim Street. On behalf of my co-host, Hina Lotus, we will see you next week. Same time, same station.
Salam, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.